Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My name is Adel Mozammel and welcome to the Muslim Education Show. Today I'm here with Brother KHATTAB, who is a youth practitioner based in Whitechapel but works across London, dealing with gangs, dealing with families, dealing with the youth and helping them and supporting them to navigate through this journey of life and through the difficulties that we have in inner city London. Without further ado, I'd like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me, Brother Adel.
Thank you for being here with us today. I know that you've come from Lewisham today and you're quite involved with the masjid in Lewisham, but you work across London dealing with a lot of different gang crime. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, not just solely around gangs, but when we are working with youth, unfortunately, we're finding young people that are already in a gang. But I wouldn't cut it as just solely gangs. Young people that are on the periphery of falling into a gang, maybe some weapon possession. So I wouldn't solely say just around gangs or who we engage with. Families that are just in turmoil, wrong place, wrong time, being stabbed, being shot, being seriously assaulted, and then we will kind of offer that intervention and support as a team.
What, in particularly if we talk about Tower Hamlets, what kind of main issues have you noticed or has come up repeatedly that you're seeing that are taking place with the Bengali youth in Tower Hamlets?
First of all, I wouldn't, if we're going to speak about a specific borough, I wouldn't boil it straight down to a demographic. But what I have noticed amongst youth in that specific borough, we don't heavily work with them. We engage with them, but they then go on to work with the kind of support mechanisms within that borough, which is very helpful for us because we work pan-London, across London. So whoever presents to our specific hospital space, we have to, ensure that they have some level of support. What I've noticed, and I think what's important, when we look at London, and we look at 32 London boroughs, 33 if you're counting central London, there are variations. You can look at each borough and say, well, we know there's violence here, but what's fueling it? Now, in answer to your question, what I've noticed is fueling a lot of the Tower Hamlets violence is drug-fueled.
Okay.
I've actually dubbed them the Lidl of drugs. According to police data, it's the cheapest on the front line. So I've dubbed them for the Lidl of drugs.
Tower Hamlets?
Cheapest.
Okay, just
according to police data.
So for our audience, the main things that we're going to be discussing today is the kind of violence that's taking place amongst the youth and the kind of problems that we are experiencing with our younger generations, with Brother KHATTAB here giving us a bit of an insight into the things he experiences as a youth practitioner and the kind of problems that he's engaging with and trying to help support youngsters with. So I wouldn't have guessed that Tower Hamlets is seen as a powerhouse for drugs. I would have always assumed it was outside of London.
It's not so much it being a powerhouse of distribution. We're talking about buying. So maybe lower level.
Users? A lot of users.
A lot of users as well.
Right.
So for us, the violence, it could be a 15-year-old on a spot where he shouldn't be, selling maybe 10 pebs a day. And a young person, which is £10 wraps of drugs, and a young person actually having conflict with that, or an elder, as they would say.
What ages are you seeing youngsters out on the streets selling drugs?
Put it this way, the most dangerous age to be right now in London is a 16-year-old. And I'll give you the example. If I give you a Canada Goose jacket and tell you to leave East London and make your way to South, vice versa, right? You'll probably be okay just by your appearance. A 16-year-old who fits a specific profile, not necessarily a demographic, but a profile, you could be what we would call food. Somebody that might challenge you. And I think in December alone, we had 3 young people stabbed just because they wouldn't give up their Canada Goose jacket. So for me, the most common age, the most, harmed age is actually 16. I don't want to stick exactly to Tower Hamlets, but for me, the violence that you may see are fueled by very, very different things that we might not see come to light maybe through media, what the household might be disguising, cultural indifferences, the age gap between mum's generation coming over here and not understanding her son and the way he has to navigate through his specific residential borough. Again, I've noticed intergenerational traumas as well, domestic violence. So it might not always come out into the street being about drugs. If you're talking about the most common reason for violence, I would put it down as a youth practitioner that predominantly is to do with drugs. Whether you're in, pursuing the selling of it, the buying of it, taking a consignment, as we would say, so taking something on tick or in advance to sell onto the street that you can't pay back your guy that you owe money to. It's multifaceted of why we see the violence that we actually see within Tower Hamlets. You can't specifically say, right, it's to do with that. But if you're telling me or asking me what is the most common reason, I would say that is specifically down to drugs. And the reason why I say, and I brought up the different variations between each London borough, is because who does Tower Hamlets neighbour? To one side, but to the other side, just one road, Cambridge Heath Road, they neighbour Hackney.
Okay.
Now, if you ask me what is the predominant reason for the violence that you see, I'll say postcode wars. But I don't give that title to Tower Hamlets. So just neighbours. One has 20 gangs, postcode wars. One is predominantly fueled by drugs. However, fractions that call themselves a gang, I would still say you're still more drug-fueled violence.
Can I ask that you've mentioned that Hackney, which is neighbouring Tower Hamlets, and you said that they don't have the same problems as Tower Hamlets, that the main problem they have is postcode wars. What is it that they are actually fighting about between the postcodes? Is it that each postcode is an area that they will be selling their drugs and that's why they don't want them on each other's turf, so to speak, because that's the problem, that the money is in this postcode. But if you move to another person's postcode to sell drugs, then that's going to be problematic because you're eating off what they would be earning. Is that the reason they have the postcode wars, or?
No, not solely. Drugs is part of what fuels the violence that you see. When you look at Hackney per se, you might not like the answer, but some young people might just be bored. Some young people may have been excelling in school, was at a bus stop, waiting to go back home, and somebody came along and bullied him and humiliated him on Snapchat. And he says, you know what, you see, tomorrow, it might be trivial to you and me, but I'm trying to impress that girl in year 9. I'm going to call myself one of these gangs as a defense mechanism. Now, we know as mature adults, he's just stuck a target on his back. We know that. But in the mind of a young person, he's saying, look, I'm sick of being a victim.
Right.
So I'm now part of this gang. I feel a sense of protection. Some, again, as I said, are just bored. Some were excluded from school. Boredom kicks in. A healthy distraction kicks in. Some have been out of education for up to a year. So when you ask me, is it to do with drugs and why they get in? No, there's many different reasons. And I remember, if you look at my specific generation, there was no division within Hackney. Hackney actually had an issue with Tottenham and the Haringey borough. Everyone in Hackney got on. They were fine. Historically, the base was London Fields. Everyone got on. You fast forward a decade and a half, and you're seeing young people fractioning off and dividing themselves. And what I would say for about those 20 gangs, each gang that formed may have a different story. So I remember delivering a presentation on Dalston, and I said, what is around the corner from you? Do you know why that gang was formed? Because you guys are 15 now. That gang is about 15 years old. You weren't even born.
Right.
I said, do you know why it formed? They literally said every reason under the sun and couldn't get it.
Okay.
And the reason was, it was actually over a girl. So you've got 15-year-olds that are ready to die, stab their rivals, but don't know the root cause goes back a decade and a half before you were born, and it was actually over a girl. So young people don't even know why they're actually fighting with gangs.
Is it about a sense of belonging?
Of course, absolutely. That is absolutely one of the reasons. If there's neglect, some of my data picked up that a lot of our young people were stabbed in overcrowded houses. So
Inside the house.
if you're part of a household that's overcrowded, and let's say in the midst of a housing crisis, by the way, Adel, in London, my mum has 5 kids in a 2-bedroom. We can just envision what that looks like. Let's give her a 3-bedroom, 5 kids in a 3-bedroom. And I'm 15 and probably the oldest of my siblings. How do I carve out my own space? Right. That could be a trigger. I'm not saying it's the right one. I'm saying in the psyche of a lot of young people, when you unpack, they're actually trying to carve out their own space and sense of belonging in this overcrowded household. So sometimes I could find that void of love within a gang, unfortunately. So absolutely, when you say, is it a sense of belonging? Of course, I concur. It can be just wanting to belong to something, unfortunately.
And the culture of the gang, almost, it's not only giving them love, acceptance, possibly financial rewards as well.
Well, let's unpack that first. Okay. What is your definition, Adel? Apologies if I've changed the script and the interviews are coming.
Welcome. Well, we're happy.
What is your definition of a gang? Because it's important for the viewers to understand where we're at. And then I'll tell you what it is. But what is if I said the word gang to Adel now, you'll probably envision stuff. You could attach the definition to it. What would qualify for Adel to be something classified or categorized as a gang? And then we'll move on from that.
I would say a gang, to me, is a group of youngsters between the ages of 13 to 25 that are associated together, not by blood, but by a mutual understanding of being together on certain policies or certain agreements, that we are together and we don't like X and we will look after each other. We are a family. And I think the term fam sometimes is shortened for family, that we are a family and I will look out for you and you will look out for me. Now, if someone is to interfere with you, then I will have your interests, and if that means that we will have to take out violence as a measure of protecting you, then so be it. I also associate gangs with a world that is separate to civil society, that we see we are a road and they're civilians, and we're not here looking to give them unnecessary problems as long as they're not giving us unnecessary problems. So it's a culture we have, and it might be that we don't refer to ourselves as a gang because we're just a group of friends, is my understanding.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. I'm glad this is called the education show. Partly right. Okay. But I will push back on the term youngster as number one, and the word fam. Remember these two because my memory isn't great. Okay. The definition of what a gang is, if you're talking about the Home Office and the Google definition of what a gang is 2 or more committing a criminal offence. Okay. So take your age range right out of it. Take youngsters out of it. The definition of what a gang is 2 or more committing a criminal offence. Why? Because one person can't be a gang. Right. So 2 or more. Now, you know and I know there's a big difference between the Albanian mafia, Russian mafia, Italian mafia, and a street gang in Hackney. But we've classified them both as gangs. Is that fair to say? One is organised gang, right? One is a street gang. But the definition fits both of them because they're 2 or more committing criminal offences, right? So the youngster needs to be pushed away because there's no age restriction with a gang. And I would say that if we are happy with that definition, then there is a gang in the House of Parliament. And I'm allowed to say that because they were convicted of the expenses scandals. 3 went in to serve custodial sentences. So just because, the reason why I've brought this to light is just because you have 2 letters after your name, MP, it don't make you better than my young people in the streets of Hackney.
I agree.
Does that make sense? We have to call what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong.
Correct.
So this isn't a blanket statement about all MPs, because there are some MPs that are doing great work for our community. So let me just make that clear. However, they would fit the word gang, because they were proven to be in cahoots and they were taking my money and your money for second housing and 55-inch TVs.
So if it's two or more people committing a criminal offence, they're a gang. If the shoe fits...
Right. Now we can move on from that. So when you talk about proceeds of crime money, a lot of young people in Hackney that are stabbing each other, their bank account never went up. It's just an ego, reputation, trauma's being expressed in the street, which is why I left Hackney after 3 years and joined the hospital space, because most of the violence that I was seeing was actually being fueled by trauma.
I want to touch on this word trauma, because I find that it's another conversation that is not being talked about in Muslim society, that trauma comes from mental health. And one of the things that you said previously was that trauma is stored in the body. And I want you to unpack that for me.
Of course.
Trauma, how it's stored in the body and how it plays out, and what you've witnessed, and maybe if you can offer some examples around that. I think that's very important.
I totally agree with you, Adel, because trauma was something I realized I experienced as a child, but wasn't able to identify it until I became a professional.
Tell me how.
Because when I was working with young people, I realized what was fueling the violence or resulting in being stabbed or shot. Actually, I realized that although the hospital space I work in, the clinicians are amazing at addressing the physical wound of my young person, but there were 4 or 5 emotional traumas that probably got them to that bed space.
What are these emotional traumas?
So trauma, the definition of what a trauma can be, is an event that you've either experienced or witnessed. That's what we have to remember. Either what you've experienced or what you've witnessed. Now, I didn't go through domestic violence, but my mum did. I'm a viewer of that domestic violence. So that can still be traumatic. It's important for the viewers to know that you don't need to go through something. We have people that have experienced on the side road a very traumatic car crash that may impact them for the rest of their life. So you wasn't in that car, but we have to clarify for our young people as well that, bro or sis, like, even if you viewed something within the household, that could be traumatic. We have to make that distinction.
And almost accept that this may be something that is stored in the body. How is it? Because I accept what you're saying is that you don't necessarily have to be a victim of it, but you could be a passive onlooker, but that may affect your being.
That's right.
And how does that play out?
It can play out in many forms, especially if we're not identifying it. The first thing we need to be able to do and empower young people is to be able to identify what a traumatic incident is. So, for example, Samir and Adel, in year 9, someone took your pencil case and someone took my pencil case. I may be emotional resilient to say, cool, that's gone. You may be feeling like a victim for the next 2 years of secondary school, and that's traumatized you, right? The point I'm saying is I don't want to get muddled up with pencil cases, but I'm saying a lot of the young people I'm working with, they're having their iPhone taken at knife point. So that pencil case might be traumatic for you, Adel, but the kind of trauma that I'm dealing with is the iPhone at knife point being taken. Now, can a young person be able to identify that was a traumatic feeling? Can they? Because what they may be doing is normalizing, this is what happens in the hood. My friend got robbed last week. I'm on this GBG, get back gang mentality, and I'll get him back when I catch him on the double-decker bus. So the first point I would say is that, can young people identify that first? We talk about PTSD. I was working with a young person and I said, do you know what PTSD is? He went, yeah, man. That's what soldiers go through.
That's right. And
I said, not just soldiers. So I realized they couldn't connect with PTSD. So I said, do you understand what post-traumatic street disorder is? Just change one word. Like, yeah, like, I think I know where you're going with that. Like, Yeah, so toxic relationships, running from the police, carrying weapons, not even having a stable landline, jumping from sofa to sofa. That can be stressful, bro, when you're on the roads, so to speak.
Of course.
So now he can identify with the stresses that he's actually experiencing. But when we've packaged it as PTSD and he was only able to articulate to me, yeah, that's what, you know, soldiers go through when they come back from war. It's like, bro, I can get that as well. And I think it's simplifying information and helping young people to actually resonate with these specific feelings that they're struggling to do.
When you are at that age and you've been robbed by knife point for your iPhone, and that leaves you with a certain amount of stress in your body, and you may react to it in order not to be a victim, and you may go and rob someone else.
That's right.
And then you've begun this journey.
The victim becoming the perpetrator.
The victim becoming the
Very
perpetrator
common.
because there's no rescuer.
Very common.
There's no one to rescue that child from taking that action because there may be neglect at home. And then it goes on and on and on, and you live in this heightened state of alert at all times because there's no peace. And what you're telling me is that you actually unpack it for them and help them recognize why you are living in PTSD, because there's a certain part of you that can't be settled.
So,
tell me the journey from how do you get them from being in this level of stress, because even when they come to you, they must come to you at that level. And I know we've only got 2 minutes left before we're going to go for break. So maybe if you can give me 3 main areas that we can maybe focus on, because I think for the second part of the show, we're going to be looking at how trauma affects these youngsters, and this trauma that they experience, maybe experiencing domestic violence at home, or older brothers and sisters abusing them at home as well, perhaps. And how does this unfold in a young person's life? So I think we really are short for time here. So inshallah, you will join us again after the break with Brother KHATTAB, the youth practitioner, and we will go into more details about how trauma is affecting our youngsters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Muslim Education Show. I'm here with Brother Samir KHATTAB from Whitechapel in Tower Hamlets, where he works, but he works across London, and he is the youth practitioner. And we're talking about something a little bit more deep here. And I think where we're focused now is more about how children and the youth are impacted by the trauma that they've experienced prior to joining the streets. What has impacted them to take this step? And what I would be quite curious to know is, what have you seen are the main things that children are experiencing before they're joining gangs or before they're leaving their family homes to go into this? What are the main traumatic experiences they're having?
I think one of the main contributing factors actually goes back to your latter part of your question when you ask me why, who is you. You're impacting them. I am. Maybe your grandparents, maybe your parents. It's us. As cheesy as cliche as it may sound, I always share this because I'm not going down the road of vilifying my young people. We have to go back a step back and say, well, hold on. African proverb says it takes a village to raise a child. And in the same school of thought, it says that if that child does not feel the embrace of that village, it will burn it down to feel its warmth. That's what's happening. So young people want to be visible, right? And it's coming out in very toxic ways of how they want to be visible. Whether that's your 6-second TikTok dance, whether it's doing balloons each weekend night, whatever it may be, acting up, toxic relationships. It comes out in very, very different forms about, I want to be visible this specific way.
So what are you saying? They're not getting attention?
Attention is one of them. And the reason why I blame you and me is because we're part of that community. What I've noticed as well is that the intervention and the number one intervention will always be Islam. I am not going to shy away from that, right? It is the solution for everything, whether it goes down the throats or it doesn't. Now, me as a youth practitioner who works with all different walks of life, all different demographics, I do not oppose my values on you. I am the dawah. I don't oppose my values on you, but I have my principles and my levels. And I'll give you an example about how we start to shift thinking. So working with a young person, and I've done it a couple of times, and we was recently audited to some degree about what our work looked like, and the lady asked me last month, so how do you get across mentoring? And I say, you don't need massive sessions, although they are important to unpack a little bit deeper, but I do believe that's specialist work. But I say, if you're walking with me and you think a young person can throw lit on the floor, you're picking that up. Oh, come on, Samir, man. Come on, fam. Like, come on, bro. But, bro, you're rolling with me. I am being viewed. Pick that up. I'm not going nowhere. But, bro, come on, fam. They pay cleaners to pick that up. So if my mother was a cleaner, you basically say it and then it hits a nerve. I'm like, cool, they pick it up. Now, I'm not saying when he goes away for the rest of his years that he's always going to throw his litter in the bin. But while you're rolling with me, you've learned something valuable today. That is mentorship. Do you understand? So for me, when we look at us as a village, as a community, we're not. Let's not pretend. And when I talk about a parent who may be doing her utmost best, he may be doing his utmost best to parent. When that young person leaves that household, the village takes over of that parenting. So it can't just be all local authorities and teachers and Adel and Samir as youth practitioner. It has to be Abdul in the sweet shop where our young people top up their Oyster card.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Your background is mainly Moroccan, right? Now, traditional Muslim societies in Morocco, you will have more of this village, right? Where your uncles, your aunties, and you have a community. Whereas in the UK, and particularly in London, that community feel is almost disintegrated.
Absolutely.
Right?
Agree.
Certain places, for example, as you've seen working in Tower Hamlets, has probably got more of a community, maybe with the Bengalis, and in Ladbroke Grove, maybe with the Moroccans. But where you live in a society that the values are not like those values from traditional societies, how do you manage that? Because it's almost like authorities that are now parenting or having to parent as a result of this breakdown in society. But the question still comes for me then is that the trauma that these children are still experiencing, it might be that we've lost that community and you have these authorities that are dealing with it, but the child is still a child. Yeah, whether you're in Morocco or in UK, you suffer the same way because that humanity, that power of impact of being whatever, it still impacts the child. So I'm questioning, what is it that the child is experiencing to lead them to this life?
And that's exactly why I pointed out in my original answer that we are to blame, because the space that we're creating is not free from the traumas they're experiencing. And coming back to your answer, what sort of traumas are they experiencing? It goes from toxic relationships, sexual transmitted diseases, poverty, lack of opportunity, lack of Islam and its values and its principles. We're not sacrificing for our children to blossom. We've also left the mentality of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically sidelining that, and we've been chasing the buck. Now, one of the biggest contributing factors for violence within the UK, so not just solely to London, 41% of it is fueled by poverty. Tower Hamlets is the poorest borough in London. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, no.
I didn't know that. Poorest borough. It has the highest rate of children living in poverty. I believe it's 53% of children live in poverty. I think it's 51% for Hackney next door. And the three major poorest boroughs are actually Newham, Hackney and Tower Hamlets. So I'm going to ask you, you didn't know that it was the poorest borough and it's one of the biggest contributing factors, right? But do you know the average wage in Tower Hamlets?
No.
You don't know? is £75,000 a year. So how do you reconcile the average wage of being £75,000 a year, but it's the poorest borough in London? Can you reconcile that for me?
No.
Because of Canary Wharf. So Canary Wharf will spike that average, but when you come out of it, the average wage is around £18,000.
Wow.
So a young person that's growing up in that may just want better for their family. And I noticed culturally as well, we're watching what your bricks look like and what my bricks look like. And what I mean by that is that you're in a new build and I am not. So we're now pushing away how we should feel about each other within a community. Now we've become competing. Young people get marginalized within that as well, if you're just talking about that specific community. So the traumas come away from the choices that they're making as well. Can't be all parents' fault, can't be all teachers and schools' fault, can't be all local authorities and police standings' fault. We have to take some accountability and say, which is why I said I'm blaming us, that young people actually get marginalized with that space. What have we created for them? What opportunities have we given them? Then you can jump onto the system and you can talk about, I had a psychologist in the hospital and said, Samir, you know, these are lovely kids. They're turning up stabbed and shot. There's so many opportunities out there. I said, hold that thought. She goes, what? I said, I agree with you. There are opportunities out there. But when you talk about opportunities, can we talk about accessibility? And she goes, oh, what do you mean? I said, oh, okay. Hackney Town Hall, at the time I was working in there, amazing what they do. They give out 50 apprenticeships a year for young children as young as 16 to go on and secure employment in the council. Love it. Allahu Akbar, mashallah. But some of the families I'm working with, in the hood, if you will, can't afford Wi-Fi. They don't even know about that website to access that for their young person. So when you talk about opportunities, let's talk about accessibilities. Because what's happening, Adel, is that we don't have the same starting line. So when you look at Tower Hamlets, maybe you can talk about opportunities, but we don't have the same starting line. So let's talk about accessibility as well. I have to agree, I have to admit, they are a performing borough now. I am seeing them grow. It's nice to sit on the sidelines and just see them blossom in certain parts, but the job ain't and the fight ain't over by no means. But again, it's us as a community having to take lead as well, not always relying on what a system can offer us when we have the best recipe.
Do you think there's a bit of a moral crisis with those people that have achieved in these boroughs that they've achieved and it becomes almost like a competition?
Yeah.
I've done well, I've made money, I've got my education, and now it's a selfish kind of me, and they kind of maybe move out from there and want better for themselves because we are living in this society where it's not a community.
So
you've done well for yourself, you get out, save yourself. How do you reconcile that? Because even those that are doing well are not wanting to look back on returning and helping. And when you've come from poverty and you've had to really struggle, you almost take in this psychology, well, nobody helped me.
Yeah.
I did it.
Yeah.
I was resilient enough to do it. I succeeded out of my own hard work. I chose not to be an alcoholic, not to be a drug dealer. So therefore, if nobody gave me any chances, it becomes almost like, what advice would you give to them?
So there's a few things there as well. That's a mindset. And me and I, rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, tested you with wealth and opportunity. So what are you going to do with that, right? So a mindset of, well, I chose not to sell drugs and I chose to put myself through uni. I'm on a personal journey. So each to their own. So I'm just trying to right my wrongs and from the background that I came from. So I'm kind of a servant to youth seeking Allah's pleasure. If that's my purpose and I've turned my pain into a purpose, then that's my job. But you're taking me back to what I originally said about the village. We're not a village. And when you talk about that specific element in the community that, let's say, has a little bit of success or has got out of the hood or still remains there but is living a comfortable life, I say to those individuals, how come you haven't sent the lift back down? I don't want your money. Show me how you've done it. Show me an opportunity that could probably
What about the argument?
We don't send the lift back down.
What about the argument they will say is that, well, I haven't finished. I'm still, because remember, your desires never end.
100%.
Right?
You'll constantly be thirsty.
Right?
Constantly.
They're like, oh, and also if you've come from poverty, there's also a fear of sending the lift back down. I might become poor, right?
Yeah.
So how do we advise? Because we do have these people that have kind of moved forward, but what's happened now is that they want to turn away and never look back.
Sure.
But that's a part of their own history.
Yeah.
Part of their trauma, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But I'd also say that there's a trait of greed that exists within humans. There may be... We need to clarify rich and wealth. They're two different things. You know, wealth is what your children will see. Rich might be something you could open a door to. This is why I said we don't want your money. Just maybe show one youth in your community how you done it. I didn't say give them money. Give them a distraction. Come back. Your evidence that it can be done. We're from the same postcode, for example. This is why I say that isn't an argument for me to say, hold on, I ain't made it yet. Like, you do you. Now show me how we can do it together, for example. So no one's asking for a handout. The lift being sent down is not giving me a drink. It's basically saying, look, you can navigate through this way. What we also need to clarify as well is that what works for you might not work for your friends. It might not be an interest. It might not even be your strength. And you being behind them, you may supersede them later. So your strengths could outdo them if you're talking from a dunyified measuring scale, right? For me, that element of the community that does go on to live, maybe they're enjoying their gains, maybe they have a goal and they may return. So I'm not trying to dig out that specific set of people, but there are some that do that. And there are some that go on to do it and they become an example for young people. And it's the toxic road that they actually chose, but because they've seen the quick money, they think it's long money.
Right.
How many rappers that have won awards that have gone on to go to prison for selling drugs? So evidently, that choice of career didn't get you out. You still had to dabble in a bit of drugs to keep that wealth or maintain a lifestyle. This is the message we've got to send to young people, that quick money is not always long money.
And I think one of the things that you referred to earlier is that you're grounded by your principles of Islam.
100%.
And it's, however, all of these different scenarios that we've talked about, those that have gone on to make money, those that are, even if they're rappers or anything else, it all seems to boil down to your morality, your ethics, 100%. Your principles.
So.
And we have Islam as our guiding principles, but we also seem to have a society in certain parts of London that are predominantly Muslim.
No.
And they have parents that are applying prayers and so on, yet this is also a huge problem. I want you to kind of maybe give us a little bit more of where and how that problem arises. That you have families that are, you know, dad's going to the mosque, but then you have son that's going to a drug house. How does that happen?
Well, dad going to the mosque, is he taking his son with him? That could be a form of neglect. It could be on your journey for worship. Have you made Islam accessible to that individual? I've known a lot of drug dealers whose dads are imams. So, you know, the amount of Islam that you see within a household doesn't equate to a pious household, or every individual, should I say, within that household as being pious, if you will. The morality is what is lost with us within a community. And that I will upset a parent. I'm not scared to say that there are some parents that actually accept haram rizq within their household, haram money in their household, because you're happy for your son to be the flyest kid on the block. But when he's dead, you want to wear a t-shirt saying R.I.P. But you was happy for him to have his Jannah in the dunya, while everyone else in the community had their imprisonment. Because you saw that wealth coming through your household, you bought your little village back home or wherever it is. I'll call you out, mum. And there's so many times that I've actually gone. Imam Shakil pointed it out the other day. And he said, you know, because unfortunately we've had within the community 2 young people stab each other in a masjid, which is just not acceptable. Not our masjid, but a masjid in our borough. So he pointed out as well that, you know, parents have allowed a lot of stuff or turned a blind eye to it. So you're actually perpetuating a lot of
You're part of the problem.
Absolutely part of the problem.
What advice would you have for parents that are trying to establish a religious household, an Islamic household, but how do they manage the generation gap?
It's a great question. Continue with dua, number one. Yeah, we look down on it. It's the weapon of the believer. We look down on it. It could be a test for them. It could be an expiation of their sins. We have had, some great parents practice Islam, establish salah within the household, establish fast, but somewhere along the line, the son has gone off the rail, or the daughter's gone off the rail, or they haven't met your Islamic requirements. They are still your blood, they're still your child. You continue to make dua for them. I am somebody who went off the rail from age 14, served 16 years in prison. My mum's dua will constantly be made, and now I'm serving my community. Yeah, I have gone from, the unit in Belmarsh, which is essentially a prison within a prison, to now walking the wards of a Royal London hospital with NHS ID. You think that was solely down to me? So the dua of the mother should constantly be made for their child, and I know they've envisioned for their child happily married, cat and dog, car in the driveway. Yeah. This isn't a definition of success according to Islam.
That's a really good point.
The parents that have continue. You don't know what sujood your son's going to lift his head from, and then he says, today I'm going to fix up. Some people actually are waiting for their life lesson, but what we have to try to do is get them to stop it, because you could end up 6 feet under. You just said to me in the cafeteria, Simi, I might not be here tomorrow. So let me just do what I can do. You've accepted death could come to me at any moment. I might not be guaranteed my lips to hit this glass. Yeah, you can say that with lip service, but is your heart connected to that? So with our young people, they kind of have a syndrome that I've identified them to be having, which is it will never happen to me syndrome.
That's right.
Because I had that as a teenager. Man, I'm definitely living past 30. Definitely. And you're like, who said you're guaranteed tomorrow? The mind of a young person that hasn't tapped into that yet. That taqwa, that God consciousness isn't there yet. So parents that are trying to continue, what are you going to do? Give up?
I think one of the things that a lot of parents fear is that their child will go on the wrong path, and they end up almost suffocating that child, trying to control that child for fear of that child's failure. Because they don't want them to almost... I think sometimes parents want to protect children from being hurt. Or he might do something that I can't protect him from. Particularly fathers struggle with this more than mothers. Like, how do I protect my child from this? And especially in a society where there is no village and there is all these problems, what kind of advice would you give, apart from making the practical things that maybe fathers and sons or fathers and daughters can do to kind of bridge that gap so that you keep them together, not just through... Because sometimes children might not want to practice. Yeah. What other things can families do to stay together?
Yeah, and that is important, because I have seen families, especially from our community, happy for the system to take over the parenting. And they've actually adopted a corporate parent, which is not something we've always encouraged. But sometimes it can hit levels where the family can't cope no more. What I would say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the status of that parent. We know the levels that you have. We know 3 portions of the love go to the mother. We know the other portion goes to the father. When a man came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, who's most deserving of my love? And he said, your mother. And then he said, and who? And then he said, your mother. And then he said, and who? Then he said, your mother, then your father. But what I would remind the parents that has scared me, even with having children, that the child can call the parent to Jahannam. Say, come here, because you failed in a specific role. Now, going back to and that should be an Imam booster to say, I'm going to continue to try and establish. The advice I would say is that it's difficult to answer. I haven't run away from it, but it's difficult because, managing an email inbox, I've noticed from, our specific community, mothers telling us and, Aki Ayman and all these people, come along and turn my 15-year-old son into a man. What seeds were you planting? So it's difficult to give you nasiha when the sacrifice... Everyone is now talking about early intervention from an early age. I never touched drugs. I was a bit of a bad boy. And I had a violent streak. and my DBS just escalates as I got older. But I never touched drugs. And the reason why I never touched drugs is because I remember watching a video in year 6 of a person dying from an ecstasy tablet. So that intervention had a profound effect on me. It's the same with Islam as in its principles, that you're here to equip your children, yeah, to be able to stay together and value that. So for you to ask me, what advice can we give now at a specific, that's difficult because there's a whole shift, there's a tailored approach. We don't even know what that young person's experiencing to be acting out the way that he's acting out. So my advice is going to be vague because it's tailored to him. There are parents that don't even know that some of their children may be being molested.
No, this is
so it's not unpack it.
No, we got to unpack it, and each of these comments or words are almost like a tree that has the woods behind it. So there's so much that we need to go through, and the only way we're going to do this is by having you back here again.
Inshallah.
We need to have you back here again.
My pleasure.
Inshallah, for all our guests at home, thank you for joining us. I hope this has been enlightening for you. I hope you've learned from it. If you have children at home that you feel are worried or that are in a situation, feel free to reach out to me or get in touch with Brother KHATTAB directly. We'll give you the details at the end of the show. But for today, Jazakallah khair for watching, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.